The wood that you're going to be using for your ukulele is called African mahogany. Here in our wood storage room, this is what it looks like here. It's kind of a reddish brown next to the walnut here. And you'll just grab one of these boards, and you're going to be using this same wood for your neck and the sides and the front and the back of your ukulele. But right now we're going to be working on the neck, so we're just going to go ahead and grab one of these boards, bring it over to the upcut saw. Over at your upcut saw, if you notice on the end of the board, if it's not a good clean already cut, it's a good idea to just chop off a couple inches just to clean it up. Some of the boards already have been cut, so you don't need to do that, but if they have any cracks or any rough parts on the end, we're just going to go ahead and trim off just a little bit. You do that by just sliding this over on the upcut saw just a couple inches past where the blade cuts, and then we'll go ahead and just trim that off. The green button will turn it on. Remember, there's a pedal down here on the floor that you're going to tap that pedal with your foot. As you do so, it'll clamp and chop off your board. The red button here to shut it off, or you can use this button over here to shut it off. Either one will shut it off. And instead of reaching in there and grabbing that little cutoff piece, I use the bigger part of the board to push the little cutoff piece out of the way. And that way you can just throw that away without having your hand get in there. We need a piece 24.5 inches long. So over here on your Tiger stop, you can just turn it on and then type in the measurement that you want it to go to. You can just type in 24.5, so 24.5, and then just hit the start. And then the little arm will adjust to 24.5. You could type in fractions as well. You could type in 24 inch 1/2 for 24.5 if you want to do that. Either way, decimal or fraction. Right above it on the wall is a little conversion chart, what the fraction and decimal is, to help you out knowing what to type in. So we're here at 24.5. We trimmed off one end. We're going to very gently slide our board down until it bumps against that little stop, making sure it's nice and tight on the fence. And we'll go ahead and cut this 24.5. Be sure if you have any extra parts of your board that's still large, that it goes back in that wood storage room. So we're going to put this one back for someone else to use. We're going to come to the jointer next, and what this machine is for is to get the edge of your board nice and flat. You'll notice that the edges of your board are very rough, and as we run it across this jointer here, it's going to just flatten it out, removing about 1/16 of an inch each pass there. So we're going to run it as many times as it takes until that edge is nice and flat. Green button will turn it on here. You want to make sure your board is nice and tight on that fence as we run this through here. Just check it. That one actually looks pretty good in one pass, but if it needed more, we could go ahead and do another pass. Now you don't need to do both edges, just do the one. So as long as you get one edge nice and flat, you're good. We're going to come to the table saw next, and we're going to rip our board to a width of 3 inches. And it's important that you make sure that your jointed edge from the jointer, that flat edge goes up against the fence nice and tight. And all we have to do is just set our fence to the measurement that we want it to cut at. You don't have to mark anything on your board. You just get your fence and set it. You lift up the red handle, and then you can slide this left or right. And we're just looking at our little measure there with a little red line. And we actually want it right at the 3 inch mark, and sometimes just little taps just to get it where I want it. And then we're going to take that red handle and lock it down, and that'll lock that fence in place exactly 3 inches from the fence to the blade. Now if you lift up the guard, obviously with the machine off, you'll notice the height of your blade. And typically we want to have the height of our blade just a little bit above our board. So this will still cut where it's at right now, but it's quite a bit higher above our board than what we really need. And if you're looking down at the very front of the saw, there's a wheel right here. And as you rotate that wheel, the blade will either lower or raise depending on the direction that you do. And so my rule is about the height of the teeth above your board. So probably about like that, however tall the teeth are sticking above your board there is a good height. So if you come up to this saw and you notice that it's too high or too low, you got to adjust that. We do need a push stick on this because we're less than 6 inches, so we're at 3 inches right here. So I do want to use a push stick, but I'm not going to hook it on right away. If I did, it would lift up the front of my board up here. So I'm just going to have my push stick handy, ready to go, and I'm just going to use my hands holding it, and then when I get a little bit closer, I'll grab the push stick and hook it on and go through. So we'll just come turn it on right here on the very front of the machine. There's a big red switch. You'll pull on that to start it, push it, and turn it on. Here's your on switch. You just pull on this to turn it on. Shutting it off, you just press that. We're going to come to the planer next, and this is where we're going to get the thickness of our board to the correct thickness. And we need this at 15/16 of an inch thick. Right now, these mahogany boards, they come pretty thick. They're actually almost 1 1/8, maybe 1 1/16 thick right now. And so we need to get it down to 15/16. So remember, we only want to remove a 1/16 at a time. So we're 1 1/16. So our very first pass, we're going to go at 1 inch. We're going to flip our board over and run it at 15/16 for the second pass. That way we can get both faces cleaned up. So to get this adjusted, the very first thing, if this red button was pressed in, it won't let you turn it on or do anything. So just make sure that red button's twisted and popped out. And then adjusting it to 1 inch, these green buttons here will move the table lower or higher. And it's difficult to try to get it exactly with those. So instead, we just hit this yellow button that says program, and then type in what we want. This one, in this case, we want 1 inch, so we can just type 1, or you can go 1.0 if you want, just 1 inch, and then hit the little enter button, and then the flashing start button, and that'll adjust it to the right thickness that you need. And we'll go ahead and turn it on now and send our board in. So it doesn't matter if it's way on the left side, the right side, the middle, or whatever. We'll just find a spot and put our board through. Removing a 1/16 of an inch, comes out the other side, and then we have to adjust. We're going to now adjust this to 15/16. If you're not sure what 15/16 is, on this chart we've got all the measurements listed. So we just did 1 inch, now we're going to go 15/16, 0.937. Program 0.937, hit the enter button, flashing start button, that'll adjust it to the 15/16. Now we had it on this face, we're going to now flip our board over so we can get the other face cleaned off this time. Go ahead and hit that red button to shut it off when you're done. Okay, after you've gotten your board to those dimensions, so again, it's about 24.5 inches long, 3 inches wide, and the thickness is 15/16 inch thick. We're going to come into the miter saw and have the teacher help set up this little jig here. It's called a scarf joint, is what we're going to be cutting here. We're just going to be basically cutting an angle on here, and this is going to be how we're going to be making that neck to get the joint of the neck to come together. Here's an example of one that we've done already. So we're going to take this board here and make a few cuts to it and then glue it back together to make this shape here. And so we'll need this scarf joint on the miter saw. It has a little fence at an angle here. You're going to take your board, and we actually need to do this cut to both ends. So we're going to do one scarf joint on this end and another scarf joint on the opposite end. And just place your board up against that little fence all the way where it needs to go. And you're going to pinch this real nice and firm when you make this cut. You got to be aware where the blade's going to be cutting, that you're not holding the board where that blade's going to come down and cut. So hold your board back far enough that it's not in the way where you can see where the blade's going to cut. And again, just hold it nice and firm. Turning this on, there's just squeeze the handle, it'll turn on. You let go, it'll turn off. And occasionally this little guard that covers up the blade here might get in the way on your board. So occasionally you have to take your thumb and kind of just lift up the guard just a little bit to get it started. Once that's out of the way, you're fine. But sometimes it's in the way and sometimes it's not. Pinch it nice and tight, and you're gonna cut real slow. And when you get all the way down to the bottom, let it stop and then lift it up. If you bring it down and up while it's still spinning, sometimes that piece that gets cut off goes flying. So real slow. Let that stop and then lift it up. And that way we'll make that little scarf joint, little piece extra, we can just throw that away. We're going to turn our board around and do the exact same thing to the other side. It doesn't matter whether it's this way or this way, but you want to do one of these little scarf joint cuts on both ends. Now we're going to take our board, come over to the other miter saw for this. That way other people can use the miter saw that has that jig on there. You can leave it on there. But we need to cut off from this board 8 inches. It doesn't matter which end you cut it off from. So just choose one of the ends, measure over 8 inches, and we're just going to cut that piece off. Then we're going to cut an additional 2 inches twice. So we're going to get 2 more blocks 2 inches long from that same end that we just cut off. So first, just take a tape measure and a pencil, and we're going to measure 8 inches. Just mark a little line where it needs to be cut, and try to be accurate right at that 8-inch mark, but if you're not perfectly on there, that's okay. I like to have the board just nice and tight on the fence. This miter saw does have a light. If you turn on the light, and then if you lower the blade, you can see the shadow of the blade, and that way you know where it's going to be cutting. So you can kind of just line that up. You want to be next to your line. You don't want to be directly on top of your line. And then we'll go ahead and hold this board nice and firm and cut off an 8-inch piece. Now, we have enough to hold on to over on this side, or if you'd rather hold over here, that's fine for the 8-inch piece, but just don't hold right next to the blade when you're cutting. So hold a little bit farther away, 8 inches off. I like to let that stop before I lift it up just so it doesn't cut anything extra. So here's my 8-inch piece. Now this next part is important that your 2 pieces that are 2 inches long each, that you cut it off that same end, that square end. Don't cut it off the end that has the angle cut into it. So we're just going to go 2 inches, cut a piece off, and then another 2 inches and cut another piece off. And when we're doing this, again, try to be pretty accurate. We're just marking a little line 2 inches. And for this one, if I was trying to hold the board like this, I don't have much to hold on to over here to make that cut. It's getting too close. So I'd have to either hold it with my right hand over here and pull down the saw with my left hand, or if you'd rather, you can just flip your board around. Some people like to do that instead. Might be a little easier. But understand which side of the line we're cutting. We want to save the 2-inch piece, so now I want the saw blade to be on the other side of the line. So when I bring that blade down and see that shadow, I want the shadow to be on the outside of my line when I make this cut. So make sure you save this. We need 2 of these. So that's a 2-inch piece, and I need 1 more. Now you can measure again, or you can just take that piece you just cut and just line it up and trace it. That's an easy way to do that. So I need 2 of those. Again, bring that down. Know which side of the line we're cutting on. So that should be all the pieces I need. So I've got this little 8-inch piece I cut off, my 2 2-inch pieces, and then I also have the rest of my board with the other scarf joints. So we're gonna go put this together how it should go to make our neck. All right, we're gonna come over to a bench top to put this together, and we're gonna need a couple of these hand screw clamps, bottle of glue. I also have a little template that's gonna show the shape that the neck needs to go together. And you're gonna just take these pieces, and it's kind of confusing how they go together with these scarf joints. But in order to get that angle on our neck, we're going to take the two boards. So the little bit longer one and the little bit shorter one, the 8-inch one, goes on top. And so you have this angle going down, and then this one also, and this one just goes right on top. So it'll look something like that when it comes together. So I've had a lot of students try to figure it out something like that or other ways, but it's just, so don't put it this way, it's got to go this way right on top. And I just kind of lay it this way, it's a little bit easier to see everything. And we want to try to get this part nice and even, so this is not sticking too far up or way too far down, so try to get it right on. And it's best to try this with no glue first, just to kind of see how things go together. I would even recommend you take a clamp, because you're going to be gluing that and clamping it, but before you glue it, just try it out. See what happens when you start to put pressure on this. And because these boards are going to want to slip and move on you a little bit, and so we're going to try to get the best we can, just get a little bit of pressure. And then on here, where these go, you're going to want to take your template and just kind of feel out where that should be. And usually I go pretty close to the end of the board, and that way if I put my template on there, am I going to be able to get the whole thing drawn? I'm going to take this off so you can see a little better. But you just want to, so I can tell that this is not going to be lined up exactly where that little thing is right there. And that's okay, it just needs to have room to trace this entire pattern on here. And so that just kind of tells you where these are going. If I came over here, I might still have room. So it's not that crucial where you place this. It sticks over a little bit here, so I think I liked it better right on the end. And that'll just give me enough room that I know that that template's going to fit. So that's probably how I'm going to do this one here. And so we're just going to glue this part together, and we're going to glue these two little blocks to the end there. We'll clamp that in place and clamp that, and just let that dry. When you're gluing this, it's best to have some butcher paper down or something down on my bench so you don't get glue on my bench top, so please have that. And you want that glue to cover that entire surface that the other one's going to be attaching to, and I like to just take my finger and spread that glue around just so it gets good coverage. Now, you don't want so much glue that it's squeezing out everywhere, but you want it to definitely cover the entire surface. And those will just come together again. We'll throw a clamp on that in just a second. And these boards here, same thing. Make sure that it gets good glue coverage on the entire thing. And we're going to clamp this up. Again, try not to get any glue on my bench tops as you're doing this. If you have any extra glue on your fingers, you can wipe it on the butcher paper or something. I do have a sink that you can wash your hands off with. So we're going to take this, and that should be glued about right there. It's okay if it's not lined up perfect, because we're going to be trimming some things later on. Get some good pressure on these clamps. Try to keep them parallel. That will also help to keep the pressure nice and tight. Now this one here is a little tricky because it does want to slip and move on you, so you may want to have someone help you as you're clamping this one, because if it starts to shift on you and move, you might have to hold some things differently or get someone to help hold it for you. Too much pressure, it'll really slip on you and move, so that needs to be adjusted and held just right. Keep it nice and tight and flat down everywhere as well. Okay, we'll let that sit and dry. So I ended up putting a second clamp on here just because this part right here wasn't as tight, and so you can add a second clamp. I also wiped up any glue that may have been squeezing out a little bit, just so I don't have to deal with it later. And the other thing you absolutely need to make sure of is get your name on everything. And every single board, I'm just gonna go ahead and write Mr. Carlsvin on here so people know this one's mine. But please label your board with your name. Everyone's gonna be building the same thing. We wanna make sure you know whose is whose.